لله الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وكرم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for bringing us together in one of His houses. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this time between Maghrib and Isha, that this is a very special time about which some of the mufassirin and commentators on the Quran say that the verse تَتَجَافَى جُنُوبُهُمْ عَنِ الْمَضَاجِعِ, that refer to this time that is between Maghrib and Isha, referring to the sides of these individuals that avoid their places of rest. This is a time of blessing, this is a time that we should bring to life with worship. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He's given us in the Quran al-Kareem, and He has revealed to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that which will bring us to life, and that which will give us a good and real life. Allah ta'ala says that يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اسْتَجِيبُوا لِلَّهِ وَلِرَسُولِهِ إِذَا دَعَاكُمْ لِمَا يُحْيِيكُمْ, that O you who believe, that respond to the call of Allah and His Messenger, that respond to the call of Allah and His Messenger when they call you to that which will bring you to life. Meaning that everything that's in the Sharia and the Tahara, the purified sacred law of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that it will bring you to life. All of the teachings of the Quran, all of the teachings of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that if a human being that bears and takes on those teachings, they will find that their heart comes to life, and that they will find that they will live a fruitful and prosperous and fulfilling life. And alhamdulillah, that this is the time that we can come together and we can recollect and we can reflect, and that we can take a bashara from our Prophet ﷺ, is that these inner meanings about which every human being is truly seeking, that they can be experienced when we come together in this type of form, brothers and sisters in Iman, brothers and sisters in Islam. That our Prophet ﷺ said that مَا جَلَسَ قَوْمٌ فِي بَيْتٍ مِّن بُيُوتِ اللَّهِ, that no people will sit in one of the houses of God, يَتْلُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَيَتَدَارَسُونَهُ بَيْنَهُمْ, reciting the Quran and studying it among themselves, إِلَّا نَزَلَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّكِينَةُ, except that tranquility will descend, وَحَفَّتْهُمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ, and they will be encircled by angels, وَغَشِيَتْهُمُ الرَّحْمَةُ, and they will be covered or enveloped in mercy, وَذَكَرَهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَنْ عِنْدَهُ, and Allah will mention them to those that are in His presence. And so that we can take a bashara from this in the glad tidings, that when we come together, as an outwardly that we're a limited number, we're in a limited space. But we should recognize is that the ata and the gift of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mutlaq ghayr muqayyad, that it is absolute, it is not restricted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to whom He pleases subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that He is al-ghani and He is al-mughni. He is the one that is absolutely independent and rich in and of Himself subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is the one who enriches because of this. And that Allah ta'ala, He is al-hayy al-qayyum. He is the living, He is also the self-subsistent. In reality is that any type of gift that comes to anyone is only because of this attribute of Allah ta'ala, who is self-sufficient in and of Himself, such that He could suffice anyone else subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is a time that we can come together and that we can expose ourselves to these nafahat, to these sweet breezes of Allah Ta'ala's mercy, in hopes that we will feel a sense of mercy, that we will feel a deep-seated sense of sakina and of tranquility, and that we will feel the angelic presence, and that we will be from those who, inshallah ta'ala, are mentioned to those who, by Allah Ta'ala, to those who are in His presence. And this opens up a question, is that this idea of Allah's mercy, or the reality rather of Allah's mercy, that what is the experience of a servant's reality, what is the experience of a servant towards the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, such that when we pray upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then we say, Allahumma salli wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad. That we're asking Allah, Allahumma, oh Allah, salli, pray. And that in the Quran, that Allah Ta'ala, He commanded us to pray, that He commanded us to fast, He commanded us to perform the pilgrimage. But when it comes to salawat upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that He begins subhanahu wa ta'ala, that bada'a bi nafsihi وَثَنَّ بِمَلَائِكَةِ الْمُسَبِّحَاتِ بِقُدْسِهِ. And then he follows up with his angels. إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَمَلَائِكَتُهُ يُصَلُّونَ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ. Then we translate يُصَلُّونَ as pray. But we differentiate between the prayer of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the prayer of the malaika, and the prayer of the adami, the human being. That each one has a meaning that pertains to it. In particular as it relates to the Prophet himself sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and what he receives. So that when we send salawat upon the Prophet, then we join in it both the dhikr of Allah, the remembrance of Allah ta'ala through dua, because it is a supplication, also the mentioning of the messenger. And this is one of the a'mal that our scholars have told us is that it's definitely accepted. This is why it's from the sunnah that we begin with salawat upon the Prophet, then we make dua, and then we end with salawat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because Allah is more generous to accept either end of the dua, not to accept that which is in the middle. And that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is our greatest wasila to our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that in the understanding of this, that we say that salah, prayer from Allah ta'ala upon our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is mercy. But then that also opens up the other question, what exactly is that mercy? And what exactly does it mean for Allah ta'ala to pray upon Rasulullah? Even if it is mercy, what is the way that the Prophet experiences the way that mercy manifests? And that opens up a door where it leaves us in a state of awe. And that one of the rhetorical devices in the Arabic language is to leave something ambiguous in order to create a certain emotion, to withdraw a certain emotion from you. So Allah Ta'ala says in relation to revelation about the Prophet, وَأَوْحَى إِلَى عَبْدِهِ مَا أَوْحَى. And he revealed to his servant that which he revealed. مَا أَوْحَى. He didn't tell us exactly what was revealed. And the reason that he left it ambiguous was it's a rhetorical device to make us awe what that possibly could be. What was this experience of wahi that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam experienced in terms of his, how he received this from his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala? So that we should think deeply about the concept of mercy. And mercy, that it is one of these underlying realities of our deen, such that if you want to, that you can in a sense discuss all of religion from the lens of mercy. You can discuss all of existence from the lens of mercy. And it would be adequate if someone wanted you to say that if you wanted to sum up Islam in one word, what word would you choose to sum up Islam, the religion as a whole? That one valid answer would be, at least according to the Faqih's opinion, would be to say Rahmah. It's mercy. It would be Rahmah. And when we were with one of our teachers one time, we were entered into a country that, not a Muslim country, that I asked him, I said, what is the reality that when one of the inheritors of the Prophet ﷺ comes to a land where in those lands are a lot of non-Muslims? And that he paused momentarily when he said, Rahmah, that the reality is mercy. And meaning that to the degree that we're connected to the teachings of our Prophet ﷺ is to the degree that we are connected to the meanings of mercy. Lest we forget that the Quran itself begins, yes, Bismillah, and then Ar-Rahmaan. And here the ba is for isti'ana, that meaning that the entire universe is upheld and subsisted through the power and the name of Allah Ta'ala. But then, right after the lafz jalal, Ar-Rahmaan, mercy. Meaning that all of the other meanings in the Quran that then can be extrapolated from that get back to this reality of Bismillah ar-Rahmaan ar-Raheem. That all of existence gets back to the meanings of mercy. Were it not to be for Allah Ta'ala's mercy, you and I would not be sitting here. We wouldn't know, we would have never existed. Were it not to be for Allah Ta'ala's mercy, we would not have been, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would not have been sent to us. And this is why mercy for us has to be a concept that is at the very forefront of our minds. And it has to be a reality that is at the forefront of all of our actions. It has to be a reality that permeates into our very existence. And that one of the great meanings of mercy manifests in terms of how do we deal with other people. And that if you've ever been around merciful people, that you will find is that they are able to do things that other people aren't able to do. And you'll find the doors open for them in ways that don't open to other people as well. And they have the ability to affect change in people in ways that other people don't have the ability to do. Because when you meet someone face to face, if you think that it's just a meeting of the eyes and that you see them, the reflected image that is going back into your eyes such that you perceive in your mind this figure that is standing before you and that's it, that you need to think again. That there's an interaction that is taking place at a very deep level. That Allah Ta'ala's creation and reality, everything is interconnected. Everything is interconnected. And there's a very powerful experience that is taking place with every single meeting. And that, yes, the outward does affect the inward, but the dominant thing that affects the person or thing or whatever that is standing before you is your own individual state. And meaning that if you have a heart that is filled with mercy, is that that person that you're speaking to, or that person that you're having that encounter with, is that that state of your heart will color that interaction that you are having with that individual. And Allah Ta'ala says that Sibghatullah, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ مِنَ اللَّهِ سِبْغَةً. That Sibgha, Sabagha, Yasbighu, is to color something, is to paint something literally. And that Allah Ta'ala here is saying Sibghatullah, the coloring of God, of Allah Ta'ala. And that and who is better in coloring than Allah. But what this refers to is the coloring of the heart. And just as outwardly you can have an array of beautiful colors with a rainbow, where light is reflected through a prism, but you have all of these beautiful colors. That likewise your heart can take on different colors. It can become colored with mercy. It can become colored with generosity. It can become colored with modesty. It can become colored with trusting God. It can become colored in all of these different ways, and thus it becomes adorned through that coloring. And when that you have that coloring of that state of your heart, that is the dominant thing that is going to affect the interactions in a positive or negative way. And we have indications to this in the Quran. Allah Ta'ala, when He refers to taqwa, He calls it libas. وَلِبَاسَ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. Interesting that Allah Ta'ala says the clothing of taqwa. When we think of clothing, we think of something, an outer garment that we wear. But the difference between an internal garment and an external garment is that at times when we take a bath, or when we go and change into our bedroom clothes, or our clothes that we wear around our home, we take these clothes off, or we put other clothes on. But there's a different type of clothing, a clothing of the heart, that is much loftier. That there's a clothing of the heart that takes place. Simultaneously, it's related to this coloring of the heart. And that when the heart becomes clothed with these things that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that what happens then is that one's behavior as it manifests upon their seven limbs, the eyes, ears, mouth, hands, private parts, stomach, and feet, is that what manifests is very different than another person. And this is why for us, that when we talk about quality versus quantity, that we live in a time where quantity reigns supreme. That we live in a time where people are obsessed with quantity. That the modern world, in a sense, is an economic system. And what fuels this whole economic system, it's always funny to me, that whatever news station that you choose to listen to, is that what's always funny to me is despite everything that ever happens, is that people are still duped into this whole system thinking that it's good for purchasing power, it's good that people are constantly consuming, it's good that people are spending their money, and they never stop to think, to question that the system that is taking place, that we have for the first time in human history an unsustainable way of life. That the very proof against the modern world is that it is entirely unsustainable. Whether you look at it in particular manifestations of that, let alone when you look at it in the broader spectrum, is that it's unsustainable, it can't go on. And that the only way that the system can continue is that if people keep putting fuel into the system. And that we have a lot to say about frugality and spending our money in the proper places. And our religion teaches us not to be consumers, because the consumer is consumed. And that if you recognize that your happiness is never going to be in terms of the thing that you can buy. And we have very intelligent people spending a lot of money proving to us that our happiness is going to come in a life of constant buying, of constant upgrades, of constantly getting new merchandise and thinking somehow that this is going to fulfill the human being. This is one of the greatest lies that we are told. And that we have to be intelligent as believers. That the believer is supposed to be fatan, that we're supposed to be sagacious, we're supposed to have mental acuity, we're supposed to be people that understand ways in which we are, that our behavior is trying to be constructed, and trying to be deviating to a particular way of thinking. One of the things that Sayyidina Muhammad said, is he said that لَسْتُ بِخَبْ وَلَا يَخْدَعْنِي خَبْ, that I'm not devious, nor do I let a devious person deceive me. And this is the danger of being extremely intelligent, because the more intelligent that you are, the greater ability that you'll have to manipulate other people. Is that if you're really smart, people are very easy to manipulate. People are even intelligent people. That if you learn the way that the brain works, and you learn how to withdraw certain emotional reactions from people, it's very easy to manipulate people. But the key is that how someone can have strong, true intellect and be people who use that for a good purpose and that are protected from these traits of leading other people astray. But if we take it back to these qualities of the heart, and these qualities that are supposed to adorn our hearts, and through which we become adorned as human beings, that one of the greatest qualities that we can have is what is known in the Arabic language as Futuwwa. And Futuwwa, that it can be translated in a number of ways. But one of the best ways to translate the word is chivalry. And that chivalry, that the first meaning that often comes to the minds of those who know the English language of that might connote a meaning of someone on a battlefield, that they have to be some type of soldier, to be chivalrous. The meaning, linguistically, could point to that at a certain state, but that in its broadest meaning it's much beyond that. It's a holistic term that relates to an overall state of being of an individual, if they're granted this trait of Futuwwa, of this chivalry, and they're truly chivalrous person, and they're truly a chivalrous person. And this is something that traditional societies in general, and that the Islamic tradition in particular, was always concerned with, is that we have in sacred law what is called muru'ah, what is called legal respectability, and that we actually have certain ahkam, legal rulings, that would actually prevent certain people's testimonies being accepted in court, that if they didn't uphold their legal respectability. And legal respectability is defined as التخلق بأخلاق أمثاله. It's that someone that they take on the traits of others like them in their particular time. So there's certain things that you just never do. Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ, that these people that are in a very bad state, is that they prevent from other people al-ma'un. All of these things, normally everyone will let someone else borrow. So if someone comes to your home and asks you to borrow your hose, no, you're going to wear it out a little bit. And if you wear it out a little bit, you have to buy another hose. Or if you use a spoon of mine, they might not return it, or Tupperware, or a little bit of salt, or whatever it might be. That these type of people that are in a very bad state, that don't let others do this. So there's a type of code that existed in traditional societies. That as we've transitioned into the modern world, that this is something, for the most part, has been replaced with the monoculture of globalism, such that everywhere that you go, it's all the same. You hop on a plane and you go to somewhere in the Far East, and you see the same things that you see in the Far West, and anywhere in between. You see the same type of clothes, you see the same type of music, you see the same type of manifestations of this monoculture, which is anything, if anything, that it's entirely antithetical and moving more and more towards being entirely antithetical to these ideas of chivalry, to this idea of muru'ah, of carrying yourself in a respectable manner. Because that Allah Ta'ala has honored the human being. Allah has honored the son of Adam. He's made us upright beings. So we've been created in the ahsani taqweem, that we don't have fur, that we don't walk hunched over, we don't walk on all fours, that we're erect human beings, is that we're supposed to walk with dignity. We're supposed to walk with sakin. And our Prophet ﷺ, he's described as having a gait, G-A-I-T, a particular way that he used to walk, ﷺ, where I've seen some of my teachers, one of my teachers in particular, walk like this, which is extremely rare, because when our Prophet walked, ﷺ, he was described that he used to walk as if he was descending from a slope. Meaning that if you're descending from a slope, usually that you're going to put the ball of your foot first before your heel. Whereas when you normally walk, you put your heel first and then the ball of the foot follows. Whenever the Prophet walks, that the ball of his foot would be placed first, and then the heel would fall next. If you try to walk like this, it's very difficult. And when you do it, if someone is gifted to do it properly, is that it's the most graceful thing possible. And that the way that the Prophet ﷺ walked, we were just talking about him earlier, that the Prophet was the most determined human being on the face of this earth. Is that when he went somewhere, that he was focused, he went where he was going, he was determined, and that he didn't look to the right or he didn't look to the left. He either used to look straight ahead, or he would look down. That he wasn't someone that was flustered easily, or someone that was just light, that would be impacted by this or impacted by that. He was a determined human being, and that he was the most determined of human beings. And this for us is one of the most important traits that we can have, because, and it relates to chivalry, because people ask all of the time about istikhara. They need to make a decision. They don't know what to do. What type of field or course of study should they do? What type of job should they seek? That should they marry this particular individual? Should they make decision A or decision B? And oftentimes if you see people in a state of taraddud, that they're in a state of not knowing what is the proper thing to do and they're wavering. And that wavering is not a good state to be in. And we've been given a practical methodology to help us from wavering. Because wavering is not healthy to the human condition. And that there's a fine line between haste and between wavering and not making a decision and having resolve. When you need to make a decision, you need to have resolve. And the balance is somewhere in between. And so that, yes, that al-ajala min ash-shaytan wa ta'anni min Ar-Rahmaan, that haste is from shaytan, and having deliberation and thinking things through is from the All-Merciful. I mean, that's a praiseworthy quality. But at the same time, that once you go through this practical process, is that then you have to have resolve. And you don't look back. And there's an example of that we'll mention in the seerah, but what is, first of all, that practical methodology? Any decision that comes to you that you know is something that potentially could be good for you. Because that the sacred law gives us the boundaries. The Sharia is the skeleton of the body. It is the skeleton of the body of your religion. Meaning it gives, and this is why that you have certain definitions. If you look at what the scholars define nikah, for instance, that it's dealing with the bare bone realities of some of the underlying principles of marriage. But this is the whole point of law, is that it deals with the bare bone realities. And that the flesh comes from the other sphere, the vertical dimension of ihsan, of excellence. So law sets the boundaries of what you could possibly do. It doesn't necessarily tell you what is the best thing to do in general, or what is the best thing to do in terms of your own haq and your own right. That is something that requires something else. And this is where istikhara comes in. And that istikhara is the guidance prayer. And that the Sahaba used to say is that we were taught the istikhara, the Salaf used to say, that we were taught the istikhara prayer, the guidance prayer, the way that we were taught a chapter of the Quran. Meaning that just as you would recite a chapter and learn how to recite a chapter, that they were taught how to recite the istikhara prayer and how to perform it properly. And that any decision someone needs to make, as long as it's not outside of the sacred law, because you know if it's outside of the sacred law, the murad or the intent of your Lord is that you not be there.
So you just leave that. You don't need to pray istikhara if you fall into haram. You get out of it immediately and then you move on. Istikhara is something that's within the realms of the sacred law that you don't know necessarily if it's what's best for you. So this is why our Prophet ﷺ taught us this. This is why that he also told us that he will never be at loss, those who pray the guidance prayer, and will never regret if they seek the advice of others. Meaning that this is the two-step process, is that you pray this istikhara prayer. And even though you might have an inclination towards one thing or the other, one of the etiquettes with your Lord is that you assign your affairs over to Him. Because you really don't know what's best. And our Lord tells us in the Quran, perhaps that you dislike something and it is good for you, perhaps that you like something and it is something that is harmful for you. That we don't know, and it is Allah who knows. That there's things that we think are good for us, but in reality they're not good for us. And there's things that we think are not good for us, in reality they are good for us. And this is why that we have a very nuanced understanding of the problem of evil as it's termed. Or in other words, the problem of human suffering, which is known in the Western tradition as theodicy. That we have a nuanced understanding of that. Is that there are certain times where you can consciously inflict pain in yourself for a greater benefit. This is why we go to doctors. This is why that you put yourself through a surgery, even though it's quite painful, because that in and of itself you're willing to bear that pain because of the benefit that relates to that. And this happens in a religious context constantly through tribulation and how we're afflicted with tribulation. So that when someone prays istikhara prayer, that they assign their prayer over to their Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they concentrate on the supplication after they pray the istikhara prayer, or in the last rak'ah of before after the salams, when they recite the prayer, and then after that they seek the advice from people. And they ask good people, people that they trust. And that if you have a close friend, well, all they're doing is telling you what you want to hear, that those are not the type of friends necessarily you should have. Definitely those are not the type of friends that you should seek advice for. That the sign of a good friend is a friend who's honest with you. The sign of a good friend is someone who tells you actually what you don't want to hear. Not just for the sake of going against you always, because we all have friends that just, no matter what you say, they play the angel's advocate. Right? But a friend who really, through proper nasiha and advice, is that they're willing to tell you something that you're not willing to hear, or something that you don't want to hear. And so after you go through the process of seeking advice, and you're patient and you deliberate it, then you have to make a decision. And that making a proper decision, that all of the requirements that we just mentioned, inwardly and outwardly, such that you're not hasty, but at the same time that you don't pause when you need to move forward, you have to learn how to make decisions. And that here is where that a trait will manifest from your heart that's related to shirk. It is the trait of being resolute, of having discretion. That when you make a decision, that you have to go through it. And here, if you have taraddud and you start wavering, and you always worry, well, what if I do this? Or what if I do this? One day you're here, one day you're here. That's not a positive thing. And the example in the seerah of the seerahs is that in the battle of Uhud, that the Prophet ﷺ initially wanted to fight the battle and to defend Medina from within the city. And some of the young Ansar, that they wanted to go out to the battlefield and fight. And so that the Prophet ﷺ had the most adab of anyone. That he had the most complete intellect, that he was a person who sought advice like no one else. That he was constantly consulting the Sadat and the Sahaba, at the same time that he reached the perfection of human intellect, ﷺ, indicating and teaching us that one of the signs of true intellect is that you always consult those who are specialized in a particular field, or have a particular gift, or have a particular type of knowledge that can be of benefit. And that this is something that is very much a part of our deen. So after this process of consultation, is that the Prophet agreed to go out to the battlefield to fight. And the next morning, as they slept, they started to regret. They recognized that the Prophet initially wanted to defend from within the city limits. And they started to worry, like, oh my God, what did we do? What did they started to worry, because that they convinced the Prophet to fight outside of Medina. So they were walking to him to say that let's just go with your opinion. That the Prophet ﷺ came out wearing 2 coats of armor. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He was wearing 2 coats of chainmail. And then when the Sahaba said that they wanted to go with the opinion of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ said that it wasn't befitting of a prophet that after they wear their armor, to then take it off. Meaning that the decision had been made at that point. They made the decision that they were going to go out and meet the enemy outside the city limits of Medina. And that even though that they wavered and they wanted that point to go back to what the Prophet said, the Prophet went through with it. And he had resolve. And then that what happened in the Battle of Uhud happened. And perhaps part of it was because of this process. But part of it was as well as the archers who disobeyed the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, thinking that the war was over, not realizing that he told them to stay there regardless. But in the end, that even though outwardly, that in a sense, that although it wasn't a complete defeat, that Uhud was a type of defeat from one standpoint, but from another standpoint it was a victory. It was because there's certain things that were learned in the Battle of Uhud that otherwise could not have been learned. And meaning, in similar sense, that once you make a decision, and that you go through with that decision, that you have to go through with it. You have to go through with it. And even if it's rough, even if it was a wrong decision, there's something that you will learn in that will then benefit you. But you will acquire the trait that once you learn how to go through the process of deliberation and the practical methodology of how to make decisions, and then you actually put it into practice, that you will develop this beautiful trait of being resolute. You will develop a beautiful trait of going through with things. And that if you look around at your friends, and you look around the people that are around you, that one of the traits that is the most difficult traits to find in someone is commitment. There's a lot of people who want to do good. There's a lot of people that want to sacrifice. But when it comes down to it, the people that will be there for you through the thick and thin, that will be there for you even if you're not giving them some type of recompense, whether it be monetary or something else. The people that will really be there for you are actually very few. And that we can recollect the story of our Prophet in the Battle of Uhud, that as they were charged and they were ambushed, that many of those, especially those who just converted, fled. And what did the Prophet ﷺ have Abbas do? Abbas had a very powerful and beautiful voice. Then he started calling, Ya Ahl al-Baqarah, Ya Ahl Ali Imran. Then he said, Oh people of Baqarah, Oh people of Ali Imran. And he called them. And that resonated with him. Because someone who memorized Surah Al-Baqarah amongst the companions, that was a lofty maqam and rank. Because that meant that they implemented everything in the surah. If they memorized Ali Imran and Baqarah, it means that they implemented everything that's in both of those surahs. And that they actualized the meanings that were there, that were contained therein. And this resonated with them. And then they came back. And that even in the life of the Prophet, as that he had people around him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that those that would never, ever, ever leave him. And one of the greatest manifestations of that, and this is the story of Sayyidina Muhammad Siddiq, that in the apostasy wars that took place immediately after the Prophet returned to the mercy of the Aale, that one of the things that Sayyidina Muhammad Siddiq said, أَمَّا يَنْقُصُ الدِّينُ وَلَا فَلَا. As for the deen to become deficient, to wane while I'm still alive, no way. That's not going to happen while I'm still alive. I mean, this was someone who was willing to put everything on the line for the deen. And in the end, we all make choices. And there's all one of the ways to determine the level of our tadayyun, of our religiosity, is to what extent are we able to really truly sacrifice? And to what extent is that willingness to sacrifice being guided by the dictates of the intellect and the dictates of the sacred law? Because again, if you see people that are willing to sacrifice, but they sacrifice for the wrong reasons, or they sacrifice in the wrong place. Or you see on another extreme, people that don't have the desire even to sacrifice. And this is one of the ways to determine the level of our deen. To what extent are we able to sacrifice? that the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, Sayyidina Hassan bin Ali, that they said that he divided his wealth. He gave out half of his wealth twice in his lifetime. And he said that at one particular juncture in his life, that he decided to give away half of his wealth. And so he said, khalas. He added up his assets and he gave away half of his wealth. He did that twice in his life. And that's what he was willing to do. Sayyidina Muhammad said he gave out all of his wealth. And to what degree are we willing to sacrifice for that, for instance? Right? What degree are we willing to sacrifice for our wealth? What degree are we willing to sacrifice for our time? And what degree are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of the deen of Allah Ta'ala? And this is the spirit of Sadat and the Sahaba. It is just as relevant today as it was then. That these meanings that were flowing through their veins, that these were a people, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Were you to have seen them? You know what Hassan al-Basri said? He said that I saw a people, were you to have seen them, you would have said that they were majaneen. Majaneen in Arabic means crazy people, insane people, madmen. Were you to have seen them, you would have said that they were madmen. Right? Meaning that they were willing to sacrifice so much for the deen, that they were willing to do things that to the extent that other people would have thought, you know, that's actually a bit strange for a human being actually to do something like that because of it. But these were the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that they lived following the greatest sunnah. If someone would ask you, what is the sunnah al-udma? What is the greatest sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What would you say? What is the sunnah al-udma? What is the greatest sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? There's many types of sunnah, and all of them are great. The outward sunnahs are great, the inward sunnahs are great. The sunnahs that pertain to his hygiene that are great, the sunnahs that pertain to his character are great. All of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ are great, and they're all magnified in our eyes. But the greatest sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ, of all of the sunnah that we've learned from our teachers, is to renounce the world and to devote your life to Allah. That is the sunnah al-udma, is to renounce the world. And it doesn't mean that you give away all your possessions and all your money and that you become a pauper. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But you detach and that you direct your life to your Lord. This is the sunnah al-udma. That unfortunately many people that are following many of the outward sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ, that they forget this greatest sunnah. This is the sunnah al-udma. Is to work for the next world. The otherworldly impulse of religion is the essence of our deen. The otherworldly impulse, living for the akhirah. And that is something that people can point you to, they can try to encourage you to follow. But ultimately it's a decision every single one of us has to make. To what extent are we going to prefer the next world over this world? That there's a direct correlation between our state now and between the way that it's going to manifest in the other world. Because when we talk about the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, is that yes, we understand that there is a reality of the straight path. But to the degree that we follow the reality of the straight path and how it's translated here in this world, will be to the degree that it manifests in the next. Because there is a sirat, there is a bridge over hell. And to the extent that we stick to the Sirat al-Mustaqim now, will be to the extent that we will cross over that traverse in the next world. That to the extent that we adhere to that thin road, and oftentimes fine line between two opposite extremes, will be to the extent that we remain, and that we pass over the bridge that traverses heaven. And some people pass like lightning, other people pass like a swift horse, other people pass running, other people pass walking, and some people pass crawling. And other people, that won't make it across. And there's a direct correlation between the two. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses to be all from those who pass like lightning, inshallah, enter into paradise without hisab. So taking it back to these meanings of Futuwwa, that if you look at Imam al-Juzani and his ta'rifat, that he discusses and he defines Futuwwa linguistically as a sakha wal karam. It's generosity. Meaning one of the underlying traits of a chivalrous person is that you find that they're generous. But one that we have to understand is that generosity is not necessarily what we think it is. We limit generosity oftentimes to wealth, which is not necessarily the case. There's many different types of generosity. Being generous with your wealth is one type, but not necessarily how much you give out is the determining factor of your generosity. There's a beautiful story that they mention about one of the great imams of Hadramaut, Imam Abu Bakr al-Almi, that he was a person Allah Ta'ala blessed with great material wealth, and he lived in the southern Arabian Peninsula in the city of Aden. And one time a scholar came to visit him, and he wanted to honor the scholar and to honor the knowledge of the scholar. And so that he knew that the scholar liked the heart of the animal. And so he sacrificed 50 goats for him, and he cooked 50 hearts. And we think that's probably weird. Like, who likes the heart, right? But actually, when we were in Mauritania, they actually eat everything. They even eat cow hooves. I've eaten they eat the meat. Yeah, they eat the meat that's in the cheek. They pull back the cartilage of their nose and pull back the bone and eat the cartilage. They even eat the eyes, eat the tongue, and we kind of think that that's a bit gross and all, but it's actually you get used to it. It's actually could be tasty. Actually, the head is the delicatessen in many cultures. It's the most distinguished guest that they serve the head. And I have kind of a funny story on that. One of my friends, when he first saw this, actually the first time I saw this, I didn't know it was the head because it was just in a plate of couscous, and I thought it was just a lump of big meat. And the son of my Shaykh, that he pulled back the nose to get the cartilage, and a friend that was next to me, made a sense, oh, like that sound. And that this man was a scholar, he was a great scholar in his own right, and he just started laughing. Thought that was the funniest thing. That these opulent city dwellers thought that was something that was distasteful to eat the head. Anyways, that they would eat everything. They they'd eat the intestines. They would benefit from everything related to the animal. Anyways, this particular scholar, he liked the heart. And so he served him a platter of 50 hearts. And what the scholar had crossed his mind, he said, this is israf. This is kulu, washrabu, wala tushriku. Eat and drink and do not be extravagant. He said, this is israf. This is extravagance. And this thought just crossed his mind. He didn't utter it outwardly. And then this imam picked up on this thought. And this is what is called firasa. And one time that one of the Sahaba came into the presence of Sayyidina Uthman bin Affan, and he just looked at the adornments and the ornaments of a woman on his way, that he gazed at a woman with desire. And when he came into the presence of Uthman bin Affan, what Sayyidina Uthman said, he said that someone's going to enter into my presence, and the traces of zina, of fornication upon their eyes. And then he said to Uthman, Awahid ba'da Rasulillah? Right? Is this revelation after the Messenger of Allah? And he said, no. He said, this is firasa. This is a light that Allah Ta'ala places in the hearts of His righteous servants. This is what is called firasa, inner sight. That there's people that can perceive thoughts of individuals. And there's a reality to that. And that the Prophet had the ability to do that. He elected the Sahaba by way of inheritance of Rasulullah, is likewise elected Ummah, are granted this ability at times. And so that he picked up on the thought of this individual, and he says that, do you think this is ifrah? He says that as for all the meat, he says, don't worry, we feed hundreds of poor people every day. None of it's going to go to waste. He says, but I'm trying to honor ilm, and you're trying to tell me that this is extravagance. He says, but that everything that I've just done for you, that if you think this is generosity, my brother in Kareem, that he's a lot more generous than I am. And so you should go seek him out. So he's like, how can you be more generous than this? And he just slaughtered 50 goats for me and served me a plate of hearts. So he goes to visit his brother in Kareem. What time do we have? 5 minutes. So he goes to visit his brother in Tanim, and that his brother in Tanim lives in a very small house, very simple. That he spends the night at his house, no breakfast was served. That he's getting close to Dhuhr, and he comes in, and that he comes in with one loaf of bread. It's called a course. It's not a loaf like we think, like a loaf like that, like a circle piece of bread. And it's a thick type of bread. And he splits it in half and gives half to his guest, and he eats half. This person eats this half of the loaf of bread, and this one is mine. How could this be? His brother told him he's more generous than him. And then he speaks to this man. He says, I went to see your brother, and he told him a story about 50 hearts and so forth. He said, your brother told me to come visit you. He said, because he said that you were more generous than he was. And so that this scholar then said to the visitor, he said, my brother told the truth. He said, my brother has a lot of wealth. The percentage of wealth that he gave you from his overall wealth was a very small percentage. He says, but this loaf of bread is all I own. This is all of my extra wealth, so I gave you half of my wealth today. And he said that, meaning that there was the meaning behind it. And one time the Prophet was brought a tray of dates and a tray of gold. And he said that he didn't know which one was weightier in the sight of God, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And quantity is only taken into consideration to the degree that the Sharia delineates it as important. After that, it's about quality. And the Sahaba were people of quality. They were people who did certain things, but they did certain things with hearts that were alive, with hearts that had no love of this world in them. That the Sahaba were longing for the Akhirah. That were you to have seen them, you would have wondered what kind of person this was, because of the degree that they used to long for the Akhirah, the hereafter. And this is according to the prophetic description, the da'an al-iblah, the incurable disease that afflicts this ummah at the end of time, is hubb ad-dunya wa karahiyat al-maut. It's the love of this world and the hatred of death. This is the incurable disease. It's curable if one strives, but it's incurable if they let it overcome their heart. And that the dunya and the akhirah are like east and west. The closer to you get from one, the closer to you get to the other. That the dunya and the akhirah in the heart of the believer is like a container. The more you pour in one substance, the less that the other substance is left for the other. And that when they're entirely opposites and antithetical from each other, except to the degree that they're useful for your sake. So, in closing, in relation to this concept of Futuwwa, of chivalry, that its foundational meaning is a sakha wa karam. And according to Imam Jurjani, that it's to prefer other people over yourself in relation to the dunya, in relation to the akhirah. Meaning is that you reach a level of concern for people, is that not only do you deem the dunya something is insignificant and unworthy of even being desired in the first place, because in the end, no matter how great and lush it might seem that it's like a gnat's wing, but also is that they reach a level of uprightness and respectability and honor as a human being, is that they even want people to surpass them in the akhirah. And this is where true competition lies, is that competition is a good thing. But part of competition is that you want to win, but in the end, also you hope that other people actually outstrip you. And one of my teachers asked one of his teachers that how can someone surpass their brothers? And these are other students of knowledge. And he said that you truly surpass your brother when you want all of your other brothers to, sincerely, you want all of your other brothers to surpass you. And so these are traits that we as believers have to preserve chivalry. Because the believer, we're supposed to be honorable human beings. We're supposed to be upright human beings. And I have to say that there's certain traits that are still existing in Muslims. As long as we see the greater society in places like the United States of America, I'm talking about the United States because we're here. As long as we see these people around us as kuffar and have certain traits, and we think that we can interact with them a certain way because they are not believers, that we were going to be prohibited from great good. is that we have to have mercy in our hearts. And we have to recognize at the heart level that we've been given the greatest gift possible. And we have to be upright. And we have to be noble people. And we have to be people that live up to the ethical standard of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And is that we have to be people that every interaction we have with everyone from the greater community is that we have to have a high standard of interaction. And they have to see the nobility of Islam. This whole idea that we can cheat the system because they're kuffar, that you have no idea how this is hurting the da'wah in this country. Is that people that are on Medicaid, people that are getting government assistance when they don't have the true criterion to receive government assistance. If the government is giving you money based upon certain assumptions and that you actually are not fulfilling those conditions, it is absolutely haram for you to take that money. That if you cheat in your tax return and you get money from the government based upon cheating in your tax return, or not the government otherwise not to have given you that money, or to have been otherwise, it is absolutely haram for you to take 1 penny of that money. And there'll be zero blessing in it, and everything you buy with it will be haram, and everything you do with it will be haram, and it will be darkness upon darkness. And that we have to be people that have a standard that despite the way that anyone else looks at us, despite the way that anyone else treats us, is that we have to live up to the standard of our Prophet ﷺ. And that we have to recognize is that the biggest veil from other people to Islam is Muslims themselves. And that in the end, that we have to be examples. Is that we have the greatest teaching of all. And we have that which, if it is truly implemented at the heart level, at the family level, at the community level, will lead to a true life of fulfillment in this world, before the next world. But we have to live up to these great and immense responsibilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And one of the ways that we can do this is to truly understand these principles and these realities of our being, like Futuwwa, like chivalry, be truly honorable and chivalrous people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless Imam Prophet Muhammad. May Allah ta'ala remove all calamities from Imam Prophet Muhammad. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strengthen the iman and certainty of Imam Sayyidina Muhammad. اللهم يا من وفق أهل الخير وفاء الخير وعانوا من وفقنا الخير وإنا عليه ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان ودوائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.